Way, Kajashe, welcome. Welcome to Indigenous Insights. Monique Manatch, Indigenous. Kirikinnikinifnabekandojima. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. And today, we are very fortunate to be speaking with Steve Diabo. And Steve is half Irish and half Gayengayaga. And he's from Ganawage, and he's here to talk about his work. And I don't want to, I'm just really anxious to turn it over to you and find out more about what you do and how you do it.
Okay. Sego Sauguego, Degarunige Yujats. My name is Steve Degarunige Diabo. As I was introduced by Monique, I'm half Ganyangahaga and half Irish. Currently, I just relocated to the town next to Ganawage where I grew up. I grew up in sort of in and out of Ganawage. My dad was from there. I still have very, very strong connections to the community. So I'm just about to spend the summer in the community. I'm going to be going to the Echoes of a Proud Nation powwow in July. I'm going to be bringing some friends of mine there. The summer is going to be all about coming back to my family, coming back to my community. And I think it's a really nice bookend to what I've been doing before that. So just as a quick introduction to myself, I'm an interactive artist and creative technologist. I do art installations that involve everything from working with different kinds of technology to create a cohesive art experience, including editing videos. I have a curated collection of videos that I play on my art installation called Ancestor's Gate. And this installation won an award at the ImagineNative Festival last year. I won the 2023 New Artist in Digital and Interactive Award, which was really exciting. Since then, it's been to New Zealand. It's been to Aotearoa for the Maoriland Festival, where I was just last March, which was an incredible experience. My work has taken me to many different Indigenous communities and individuals, different types of artists, cultural experts, and language speakers. I've really been embracing the opportunity to bring these stories to other Indigenous audiences. Most recently, I've decided, I'm going to focus a little more on my family and my community. And so I'm really excited for hopefully what's to come over the next couple of years for me. But I guess that's me in a nutshell.
How did you get into this?
Well, it's an interesting question. I've always been a web developer. I spent about 20 years of my life professionally doing web development and climbing that ladder. And I'm still quite good at it. And a lot of what I do still involves web development and the same sort of technology. However, a couple things happened over the pandemic. The first thing is that my dad passed away in April 2020. He was 79 years old. And we knew he wasn't going to be around forever. We knew that his health was faltering a bit. And so I made it a point to try to listen to his stories as much as possible, ask him about his life as much as possible. And he did tell me a lot. But, you never really get enough time. There's never enough time. And then when it happens and when that person's gone, it's always a shock. It's a shock to your system. It was a shock to my mental health. That combined with the isolation and the changing work environments of the pandemic, I realized I had to be a little more true to myself. I had to really take a hard look at myself and think about what kind of masks I was wearing and what I was trying to do and whether or not that was really worth my time anymore. I decided, one, I'm going to fully identify as an Indigenous person at all times, which sounds funny, but usually it's when you have a member of your family pass away that you all of a sudden it becomes a higher priority to be connected to your Indigenous identity. I also decided to identify as somebody who's neurodiverse. I like to say I spent most of my life just trying to be normal. And then after a while, I realized I just wanted to be me. A lot of the standards and things that are expected of people are standards that are expected of neurotypical people, and I just don't think that way. I am gifted with a brain that is like a wild horse, and if I sometimes I can just let that horse run, and I can create amazing things. But like it affects my work ethic, it affects my time management, it affects my ability to focus. And so I have to tell people right from the outset that the person, I'm a person with ADHD, and that means I will think very tangentially. I will go off and do things. I will sometimes hyper focus or hyper fixate on things, and rather than look at this as a shortcoming, I'm going to just fully embrace it. I'm going to do everything I can to improve the picture of my mental health, knowing that I am, these things, that I'm Indigenous, that I'm neurodiverse. Um, the other thing is, I started making friends in the world of Indigenous creativity in general, and I saw what they were doing, and they were all telling me like, you need to be doing this too. Your talents are being wasted, just working for a wage. You should really think about taking a few months off, applying for an arts grant, and doing this full time and seeing if you like it. And so I followed their advice, and I did apply for arts grants for my idea, which was really just an idea at the time. But they believed in the idea enough to fund it. And so I got about $22,000 in arts funding from various organizations, and that enabled me to spend 6 months working on Ancestor's Gate, and it paid off.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you. It's just the beginning.
And it's scary. I'm also ADHD, and I know what you mean. Like I call it being tangentized. I just go off, just go, and being true to that and embracing that. That's a courageous thing to do. But I liken it that in our culture, we have different priorities, we have different ways of being and knowing. And what we're being asked is to fit into somebody else's culture. And so if we're true to ourselves and we're true to our talents, then what we see as a
I
challenge
fully agree with you.
becomes a
I
blessing, it
think
becomes a gift.
sort of
And it's
embracing all
wonderful to
of the
see you
different
doing that.
aspects of my identity as my genuine self was a fundamental change for me. And I also began to operate on a completely fundamentally different set of priorities, where society teaches us that we need to have a job, that we need to buckle down, and that we should have the same desires as everyone else. We should all want to own property. We should all want to get married and have kids. I have 2.3 kids, and save up for our retirement, and then hopefully retire when we're 60. And all of these things are motivated by fear. It's all motivated by like, if I don't do these things, then I will fail. Then if I don't work on this project and get it right, then I will be reprimanded. And if that happens too many times, I will be fired. And if that happens, I might end up homeless. So everything is built on this like foundation of fear, where we're afraid of what's going to happen if we question it, much less do anything different or diverge from it. But I decided instead to operate on something different. I want to operate on love for myself and love for my family and friends. And I can't just keep. I could not just keep doing the same thing forever, because it was running me to the bone. And once I decided to do that, which also involved seeking recovery from substance use, um, and sort of going all in on my mental health, I had to have a bottom in the middle of the pandemic for that to happen, and it had to get to a point where I had to do something because it felt like the wheels were coming off, and I just decided to make this fundamental change. And because of that, all of my priorities are different. Connecting to other Indigenous people and sharing our works together, collaborating, has been a huge thing for me over the past 2 years. And I have thrown myself fully into the unknown, into the uncertain, and I've been rewarded for it. And so now I know I've had a few things happen to me that have proven to me that I'm on the right path. That what I'm doing is what I should be doing right now, and that at the end of the day, I'm a much happier person. Um, my dad taught Mohawk mostly later in his life because the need for Mohawk teachers became greater. That was about 20 years ago when certain communities either wanted to improve their language revitalization efforts or have language revitalization efforts to begin with. I know in Tyendinaga, the language was all but extinct. There weren't any like local speakers of it anymore, and they made this. They made a very crucial decision for themselves, and that is they invited elders, first language speakers from all different Mohawk communities, Akwesasne, Ganasatawage, Ganawage, so 6 nations, and they invited them to stay in Tyendinaga and help build their language program and put their first cohorts of Tyendinaga adults and children through the program. And so what you have now in Tyendinaga is this landscape of Mohawk speakers where this person kind of sounds like they're from Ganawage, or that person kind of sounds like they're from 6 nations, or that person sounds like they're from Akwesasne. And it's only because they learned under an Akwesasne elder or a Gana, or maybe it was my dad that taught them. And so when he started seeing the rewards from that, when he started seeing people's lives being changed because of his work, he quickly realized this is something he needed to be doing. Ironically, he didn't actually teach his kids Mohawk. This is something I've forgiven him for because it didn't really open many doors for you to be Indigenous. And he faced a lot of discrimination and a lot of difficulty in his life, and he didn't want his kids to have that kind of difficulty. So his method of protecting us was not for us to be too exposed to our Indigenous identity, not to identify too strongly, because he valued things like education, he valued things like opportunity, and he just didn't see how if raising us on the reserve was like something he did not want to do, because he thought it's just going to lead to more heartache. It's going to make the reason I forgave him for it is because I genuinely think that he was trying to protect us. But now, I want to have the same impact on the world that he did, because he did have a positive impact on the world in everything he did. That's some of the values that I take with me from my dad. Is that if I'm not going to have kids, I'm going to have something else. I'm going to build something else that's going to outlast me, and I'm working on my language skill set. There's some good news coming, hopefully, from Tyendinaga. I might be accepted into their adult language program, which would represent a beautiful full circle, because my dad helped build the program, and for me to be able to learn in that community and take part in their language revitalization would be a really appropriate thing, like a beautiful full circle. But also, I have other skill sets too. I work with technology and art, and I have ways of combining them that nobody else does, and they make an impact on people. And so I work on art projects that promote Indigenous unity, that share Indigenous stories with other Indigenous audiences, so that the Indigenous world can become a little bit closer and a little bit smaller, and that we can all understand each other, our common cause. Because it doesn't matter where you are in the world, there's Indigenous people. You got them in every continent. You got them in Asia, you got them in Russia, and I've worked personally with some of these people, and I have just been delighted, and my mind has been broadened by having all of this knowledge about all the different ways that Indigenous people celebrate their culture today. Is a really, really powerful story to share, especially when you have the opportunity to share it with other Indigenous audiences, such as ImagineNative, such as other film festivals like Maoriland. And so I've really found my place as an Ongehume person, and as an artist, and as somebody who is finding out how to change the world in their own way, and sort of express their indigeneity in a very technological, very modern sort of way. And I'm very happy about that. I think it's like it's very affirming to me to know that, like, I still have all the time to do this, and that my best years are ahead of me, and that the connections I'm making now are some of the strongest, most beautiful, most meaningful connections. And so I just got to keep going. It's just got to I got to stay on that path.
And when you're talking about the digital community and having it founded on Indigenous values, how do you see that? How do you see the Indigenous use of digital technology as being different from the mainstream? How do we what how do we infuse our values into it?
Well, I think it's important to note that Indigenous technology is not old technology. As Indigenous people, we have devised technologies which are still strongly applicable today. And we've also appropriated a lot of the other technologies around us, whether it was like developing new ways of hunting with rifles, um, simply because it was a more efficient way of doing it, or rather over a bow and arrow, um, or establishing online workshops so that your outreach to remote places can be made much more efficient, and that you can bring these opportunities, these conversation points, and this subject matter to people who might not otherwise have the chance to hear about it. It might inspire them. Like one of the things that I make a point of doing is I consistently run workshops, technology workshops for Indigenous youth, where we do everything from like learn to program or learn to make games, and then we showcase the games at a place like ImagineNative. And there's a lot of other groups that do this as well. Um, it's a small world. A lot of the people who run those workshops, we all know each other, and that way, it's usually like, oh, I'll just message Maze because he'll be the perfect person to help me run this workshop because he knows how to do game narration or game design, which is different than game development. Whereas I'm more of a developer, and so I would say, yeah, my community is very much involved with um, spreading our message and increasing the reach of what these technologies can do for other people. A lot of people are not interested in leaving their reserve. Some people, like me, are what you call urban Indigenous. Um, so there's a bit of a bridge there's a bridge to create, and there's a bridge to cross when it comes to reaching people like that, um, and just doing your best to put those opportunities out there for people and see whose lives you can impact. And I've seen that firsthand. A lot of these people are actually amazing at what they do. It has nothing to do about whether you live near a city. Some of the very best game designers, game developers I know, they live in a 300 person Cree community that's like almost a fly-in or something like that, you know? So they deserve the opportunity. They deserve the outreach just as much as anybody else. And so I find that this is a way that we, as Indigenous people, we are co-opting technology, communication technology, to share our way of life, but within entirely modern contexts. Um, there's a lot of we're working on a project to create an Indigenous survival game that rewards you for being light on the land and shows you traditional methods of weapon making, agriculture, making canoes, making shelters, and stuff like that. And having a game like that exist gives everybody an opportunity to live indigenously. Uh, if every It's not possible for every Indigenous person to go out and shoot a moose because then there wouldn't be any moose left, right? So we can extract that experience and we can create a digital version of that. Um, Actually, in this game, after you shoot your first deer, you have a dream where you are a deer, and so you really have it teaches you about the connection you should have to the animal, and it teaches you respect for what you're doing, and to be thankful, and to never take more than you need. You know, these are traditional Indigenous values that have been around since time immemorial, and we can take them and we can put them into a game and we can enable Indigenous people of all stripes, of all ages, to take part in those experiences and get the benefit.
That's amazing. I love that because, having those that connection to the land, and I wonder about that. Like, how do we present, or how do we engage with our concept of connection to the land in a video setting, in a digital setting, within a game? I think you're really onto something here.
And again, it wasn't my idea. It was just because of this community that I'm in. We will actively connect one another if we think, you need to meet this Jeremy person because they're working on a project that you can probably take part ownership of and really help extend the vision. And so that's very much the case. That's what happens. You know, it's a community of people who are completely non-competitive, where it's not competitive dog eat dog. We just want everybody else to succeed. We just want to open doors for everybody. We want everybody to be able to do what they want and love what they're doing. And day to day, that's pretty much how it goes. I mean, when you have something, once you discover something like that in your life, it's very hard to go back to whatever it is you were doing before. Like I don't know if I can really ever have a boss by the typical definition anymore. I'm 40 years old now, and I think I've done enough of the other thing with my life now that I'm ready to kind of forge my own path. And like I said a few times, I've been rewarded when I've tried to do things like this, and I'm very excited for what's going to happen in the next 20 years for this whole community. And I'm just happy to be along for the ride.
I feel like I'm being rewarded right now. I was about your age when I decided to create the nonprofit ICMI. Had very similar experience with my father. Didn't want to teach the language.
Yeah.
Concerned and tried to protect us. We spent our summers up on the res, but we weren't told, like, this is your Indigenous culture. It was just everyday life. And really, like, him and his siblings all said, no, they're not going to need that. That's just going to cause problems for them. They were, they didn't want us to have to face a lot of the racism they did. And actually, had we lived on the reserve when I was that age, I would have gone to residential school. So there was no way. My dad, he asked him one time about it, and he said, no, you'd have to go away to school. And I thought, bus ride to the nearest town. And he said, no, no, not those schools. And so I was raised in Toronto because, well, my mom family was there, and also there was no way that he was going to allow that to happen to his kids. And so I think it's just so amazing that you're able to get into that program where your dad taught, and that through that you will be taught as well. Like, I think that's full circle. It's fantastic.
I'm going to get back to talking about like Indigenous identity because I'm mixed, and so even though I did go to elementary school on the res, that's where I was. It was commonly pointed out to me that I wasn't Native enough. And then in high school, I went to high school here where I wasn't white enough. So I was like, well, where exactly do I fit in, guys? Come on. Growing up, you know, at a certain distance from your Indigenous identity, as and having people of that generation, do that for their children as a means of protection, is a very common story. Um, and it is something that you only really step into later in life. There is a part of me that wonders why I didn't start doing this when I was 20, in my 20s. But I don't think I would have had the wisdom to take it seriously enough. It seems like such a cliche that you sort of feel more native as you get older. um, but
Oh, I wouldn't have known how.
I don't know if I was meant to waste all that time, but I sure did. It was just kind of a means for a means to an end. I mean, I don't regret. I'm not going to say I don't regret anything, but there's not much that I regret about everything that's happened, because for what I am now, and by the way, it's not for sure that I'm going to be in that language program yet. I applied. Their application process was interesting because they asked for 2 letters of reference, I was able to get a letter of reference from a Mohawk teacher who I learned under for some remote like Zoom classes, and she was wonderful. And she wrote this really touching thing. And then the other person is a friend of mine in Akwesasne who's very active in using technology to revitalize language. Um, and so we move in similar circles. And so she wrote me my second reference letter. And then the third letter you have to write is sort of like a statement of purpose essay where you need to talk about, well, why do you want to learn the language? And how serious are you going to be about learning the language? Because this is a 2-year commitment, and we want to know what is your level of seriousness? What is your level of dedication going to be? And also, why is it just why do you want to learn Mohawk? You know, and so in that letter, I was able to write a little bit about my dad and who he was, and then what he gave to Tyendinaga, because I figured, yeah, they should probably know that. You know, like if you say yes to me and if you accept me, you will kind of be repaying a favor that my dad put out to you guys 20 years ago. So that's probably not going to hurt my chances. You know. But yes, no, all I'm doing is I'm just waiting for the response. But like one of the reasons why I'm living here now, one is I want to be closer to my family, but the other reason is because I want to be closer to Mohawk communities, like Tyendinaga, which I may be moving to or moving to Belleville or somewhere around there, so that I can take as much of my program in person over the next 2 years as possible. So this is like number one priority for me right now. And I never thought I would move out of the city. If you told me last year, oh, you're going to move to Belleville or something, or Gananoque or something, I would not have believed you. But here I am. And like I said many times, like the uncertain kind of has become a comfort zone for me. And that's a really strange thing, but a really rewarding thing.
It's very freeing, you know? It's so freeing to finally let it go and say, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to go after the things I care about. And I'm not going to try to fit into some construct that doesn't acknowledge, recognize, or respect who I am.
That's exactly right. You said it.
So I'm really, that's congratulations. It takes a lot of courage. It really does. It's not easy to do that kind of thing because we're all raised to, um, follow that, you know.
Well, over my life, I have worn many masks. I have worn the mask of a white person. I have worn the mask of a neurotypical person because I have the luxury of being not being visibly a minority, and so oftentimes it just didn't come up, and oftentimes people would say things to me, uh, and then I'd have to tell them, hey, I'm native, right? And then they might respond and say something horrible like, well, I wasn't referring to you. You're one of the good ones, like stuff like that. Where like a lot of racism was just out in the open because they thought because I look like I could be anything. I don't necessarily look native. I don't necessarily look Irish either. So if you want, you can employ a privilege that a lot of other people don't have because of the way they look, because the way that people change when you walk into the room. I've taken advantage of that in my life many times, many times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
freckles, people don't notice right off till, I start speaking. But they would say, and I've been on internships where people around me were just unexpectedly racist in mainstream broadcasting. It blew me out of the water. I could not believe it. This was happening. But I have to admit, it really, it, I have to thank them because it changed my career path. It gave me purpose. And that's when I started looking into and started working with the community and doing training projects where people develop skills so that they have agency, so they have voice, that they have expression. I think that's really, I felt like in my mind, I thought we need more dog soldiers.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I think that everybody, everybody who is Indigenous, there's my brother is just like me, half Indigenous, but I'm going to tell you straight up, he's white. He's white. He does not really care. about Indigenous issues. He's just living his life. He lives in Ottawa. Um, he's just not into it. He went the other way. Myself, I am trying as hard as I can to be an Ongwehume person, which means an Indigenous person in Mohawk. Um, and now ask somebody who gets to say whether or not I'm really Indigenous, or who gets to say, I'm not Indigenous enough, or whatever, or make that judgment call. Um, I have never been questioned about my Indigenous bona fides or my Indigenous identity in a place like ImagineNative, because one, it's a very diverse group of people. There are people, there are people almost like there's lots of people who are of mixed ancestry. It is not something that they treat you like an outsider for. But now you look at a community like Ganawage, they tend to look very inward. Unlike Tyendinaga, Ganawage is very much into like, well, you're part of the your dad was a part of the community, but he married out, and so we're never going to really accept your family as a full fledged part of the community. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why I'm not trying to learn Mohawk in Ganawage, is because I don't feel that sense of belonging, that sense of connection. Oddly enough, a community like Tyendinaga is used to requiring the help of outsiders from other communities in order for them to build up their language program and their identity. And so they're a lot more open to the idea of somebody coming in from outside of the community who wants to learn Mohawk and take part in their program. As far as I know, the Ganawage language program isn't even open to people who aren't considered members of the community. Like, it's strictly for people who live in Ganawage, and I understand that. I mean, there's only so many Mohawk teaching resources to go around, but I'm really grateful, at least, that there's places like Tyendinaga that are open to somebody like me. And they're not going to be like, "Well, you're only half," Well, I've been hearing that all my life. I'm I'm a little bit sick of it. you know.
Exactly. I actually spent 7 years living in Tyendinaga. I worked at First Nations Technical Institute, and I learned so much while I was there. And I know that they were just in they had Mohawk High School. They were starting Mohawk programming. It was just like it was in the mid 90s when they were starting, and it was just I was so amazed at how forward thinking they were, and still are. That my community is very small. It's not necessarily remote. It's only like 3 hours north of Ottawa, but it's isolated. But on the one hand, they have their language, but on the other hand, it can be the same way. It's very much, closed community in some ways. And there are a couple of Algonquin communities like that as well, because they just they they've had so much. It's that environment of scarcity. They've had so much taken away that now they've closed ranks.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's also another reason why a lot of elders are extremely skeptical of using certain kinds of technology in language revitalization efforts, because they have legitimately been burned before by people who have come and tried to like catalog the language and then try to sell it back to them, like people who are not even native, who have taken a very like extractive approach to trying to preserve the culture, and they had every reason to feel maligned and feel burned because that happened. But nowadays, there's people like me. There's people like my friend Monigar in Akwesasne, who are doing these things where it's like we're creating VR worlds where you can learn Mohawk. And this is a very new approach, and for a lot of people, they're a little bit scared of it because the idea of applying new technology to language or cultural revitalization is suspect. It's something to be suspicious of. And so there is a stigma that we have to fight when we propose these things or when we try to get people involved, elders involved. It's very hard to explain in full 360 degrees of what we're trying to do. and who it's going to benefit, and when is it going to start benefiting those people?
Well, their knowledge is being taken from them. They what do they call that? The ownership of the culture and the knowledge. Every time I work with somebody who suddenly wants to talk about, they want to talk about ownership of whatever it is you're doing, it invariably ends up that there's a cultural element that they want to own. And I've had to step back from a couple of projects because there's no way that I'm going to have anything to do with them owning part of the property rights or intellectual property. As soon as people start talking to me about intellectual property now, I kind of go, wait a minute. No, that belongs to the community. It belongs to the elder. It belongs to, it doesn't belong to somebody who's developing or profiting from this technology.
Right, right.
But that happens so often. I'm so surprised at how often. Like, we had one project where we were talking about algorithms, and this woman, like, she was saying, "This is gold. You can make so much money off of this." And I'm like, "What are you doing?" And I just shut it down. She had no idea about the culture or anything. She, you know, um, made noises about supporting Indigenous, but she wasn't. And yeah, all of a sudden it was all about intellectual properties and algorithms. And I'm like, no, this is not happening.
So getting back to that idea, I was talking about that project for an Indigenous survival game. It's called Akiwan, by the way, and I will be sending over some materials about it with my other projects in follow up. But it is something that is currently funded through organizations like the Indigenous Screen Office, Ontario Creates, I think also CMF, IRAP. Um, my boss, Jeremy, is a wizard when it comes to securing funding and long term funding for things. But we know that once this game is a product, it has to kind of be able to live on its own, and it has to be able to make enough money to make it sustainable. So what do? Well, first of all, if you're native, you'll never have to pay to play Akiwan. Obviously, you're going to have free, full access. It's going to be other natives and non-natives who are going to contribute, and they're going to pay for the experience. Because guess what? It's actually a lot of non-natives these days are increasingly aware, are increasingly concerned about Indigenous issues. And this is something personally that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, but it really pleases my pragmatic self to know that there are people who are not native at all who can actually talk with experience about what are the issues facing different Indigenous groups all across Turtle Island and even beyond. I was having a conversation with my friend John. He was talking about how Native Hawaiians are getting priced out of their property in Hawaii, and I was like, that's exactly right. Like, I'm really glad that you're aware and on top of that, like, because it's a huge issue in Hawaii right now. My Hawaiian friends are very concerned about keeping their Indigenous land in Indigenous hands, and so imagine in the '90s somebody non-native actually knowing something like that. It would be unheard of. So there's this huge untapped audience of people who are interested in genuine native experiences and learning those things that they are allowed to learn, which is a form of, I guess, open knowledge sharing. Um, so they would be more than happy to plunk down $40 and play Akiwan and know that their contribution is helping other natives have access to this thing. So we're talking about like a tiered access or tiered payment system for people to play the game. And I think that this is a way to make a project like that sustainable and make it have a life that can continue to be developed. Because we don't want to put barriers in the way. This is not about adding barriers. This is about removing barriers.
Exactly. And this type of thing too, this type of game, I know what you mean. We talked about that at ICMI about making sure that whatever we create is accessible to Indigenous, but that if a university or a school board or somebody wants to have the product or use the game or what have you, then they're gonna pay. Like, they need to contribute so that we can continue to make these things and then we can continue to make them available to the Indigenous community. But because we need Indigenous curriculum too, and this form of curriculum, these games, it really speaks to the kids and it really engages them. It's good that people are now starting to bring in elders and knowledge carriers. But if you get to where the kids live, which are video games, which are digital, then you really will find that they're engaged in it and they come away learning more.
Yeah, not only can you use this in like a workshop or an education setting, as part of like an education curriculum, because the experiences are completely authentic, but for non-natives, there is this growing hunger for the for having a deeper understanding of like indigenous ways of doing and being. Um, Sometimes they run completely opposite to what a game normally is like. A lot of times, a game is all about razzle dazzle, violence, action, um, and distraction from your everyday. But this game, on the other hand, requires you to have focus on, say, okay, today picking raspberries. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to go around in the woods. I'm going to find raspberry bushes, and I'm going to fill a big bag with the raspberries, and then I'm going to put them out to dry. And that's literally your goal in this game. The game rewards you for being very in touch with your environment. It rewards you for uh, working that environment in a very sustainable way. Um, and of course, not over extracting. If you just chop down all the trees, then next season you're going to be screwed because you're not going to have any like raw material to make shelters or make a canoe or anything like that. You get a different kind of satisfaction in an experience like that. It's a different kind of gameplay and it's a different kind of reward, and it's very much in tune with indigenous lifestyle. And there is, I would making a big bet on this actually, that there is going to be a huge market for people who really want this kind of experience. And I'm not talking about sharing sensitive information where it's like you get to smudge in the game or something like that. We're not doing that. We're doing like those things which are freely shareable, which everybody in the world would benefit from knowing.
Do you do anything like medicine plants or like not just like I'm not talking about sacred medicine. I'm talking about blueberry root. You know, if you go collect some blueberry root, it's great for diabetes. It's great for, you know, all kinds of purposes. Or, you know, eat dandelion root is great for so many things. Or, you know, like that kind of thing where you would find it naturally in the environment, and that having that kind of knowledge is open and you know.
We lost the most of, in those days when colonists were just out to just destroy and decimate, generations of culture. For example, our main protein sources. I learned this from this chef guy. I think his name is Sean Sherman. He did TED Talks and stuff like that. He's a Lakota, and he said like chicken and beef and pork are all European. There's nothing North American. There's nothing indigenous about it. And these are the protein sources that people eat these days. You know, we would really benefit from knowing like what are the local proteins, what are the actual local proteins, the actual local foods and medicines that are all around us that we are not even aware of, and how they can help improve all of our lives. And so definitely there's things like dandelion root in the game, and there's other kinds of roots and plants and leaves in the game that can be used for healing from injury, or for warmth, or for even stuff like probably like laxative effect and better sleep and things like that. It all fits into the game, and we can basically draw from this like bottomless well of knowledge, um, which everybody benefits from knowing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so true. I mean, for us, um we ate a lot of partridge and we ate a lot of fish, different fish depending on the season. Like in the spring, it was the sturgeon, pickerel, like walleye, pickerel or walleye. You know, in the winter is when we would catch whitefish because in the summertime their meat is mushy. You know, so doing that kind of thing and living like it, my dad passed when I was still a teenager, but up until then, we always had moose, we always had fish, we always had um, whatever game in the fridge, in the freezer, so that we it just was normal for us. You know, didn't know any better.
One of my favorite examples of a very soundbiteable, very shareable form of Indigenous knowledge that everybody can instantly connect with is the fact that uh, all children should be picking strawberries, because picking strawberries is a task that is uniquely suited for children. First of all, strawberries grow very close to the ground. Um, they're it's easier for a child to reach them and pick them than it is for an adult. They get rewarded from the experience because they get to pick the ripest, juiciest strawberries, and maybe they get to eat one and enjoy the sweetness of the berry. And in that way, they learn, what to do and what not to do when it comes to picking wild berries. Um, and of course, children love sweet things. They love things like candy and sugar and stuff. So if they get to come home and make a nice like strawberry juice with it and learn the strawberry juice recipe, then you've got a beautiful example of like very applicable, very shareable Indigenous knowledge that everybody should do. It doesn't matter whether you're Indigenous or not. All kids should have to pick strawberries because it's just part of growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as part of, and talk about instant gratification, because you're there, you pick the strawberries, you can eat the strawberries, so right away you're getting that gratification. And there are various parts of the strawberry plant that are very good for you.
Mm-hmm.
So learning more about that once you get the plant, if it takes the plant home, or if you're,
Yep.
and it's a great way of the kids. It becomes like the world becomes, excuse me, the world becomes magic.
Very easy to propagate strawberry bushes and plant them and replant them. And oftentimes, strawberry bushes exist because somebody planted it at one point or another.
I had gathered some plants from Kittigon-ZB. My grandmother's side of the family was from KZ. It's about an hour and a half north of us, and so this year well, there were some strawberries, but not very many. I think the squirrels were getting them. So I've started digging them up and potting them so that next year I can plant them maybe in a better location, because they move. Like I put them in one spot and they're like, no, we don't like it here. And they literally migrated to another spot. And now I'm finding that they're migrating to a different spot again because my trees have grown and now they're not getting the sunshine they want. So that's why I'm okay. I'm potting them, and then I'll find a good spot for them and I'll plant them again. And like they're very, very hardy. Hardy.
Yeah, they're pretty.
Yeah.
They're basically bulletproof.
Yeah. Well, the same with blueberries. Like us in the summertime, it was blueberries. Like that was one of my biggest memories growing up, was picking blueberries.
I was walking with a friend of mine and I found some blueberries, and I just said, "Hey, look at these blueberries! They're perfect." And they were shocked that I was just going to I was going to eat these berries right off the bush. Like it was so foreign to them not to go to a store and pay $2.50 for a basket of blueberries. And I was able to pick enough of them that we had like a day's worth of snacking. And she's like, "Damn, I got to keep my eyes open. Like, how do you spot those things?" Like, well, it's pretty easy once you know what to look for. And I've picked berries in Ireland. They have black currants there, and they're kind of like and blackberries and stuff like that. Yeah, it's lovely. It's a lovely activity.
It really is. Up in my son's family is from Moose Cree First Nation, and up there they have gooseberries, which I remember as a kid. We had friends of the family who grew them, and I can remember being out there and picking them, and being told, "Don't pick them all." Having kids get out there and get on the land and do stuff like that, I think you're right. It's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's important to remember, like, you're never too old for that kind of thing either.
No, not a bit. No, that's absolutely right. That's right. Did I did want to ask you a little bit though about when we're talking about that open knowledge, the knowledge that isn't sacred or isn't intellectual property. Where do you find that line?
It's not really my call to make. I'm not the arbiter of what is like when does a depth of knowledge, or because it could literally be the same knowledge and just the depth of it is what makes it sacred. Um, I will freely defer to an elder, to somebody with medicinal knowledge or food knowledge, or that kind of traditional knowledge. I think it's important to make sure that you do have a good handle on whether or not this knowledge is something that is open and shareable or something that is sacred. I think that a lot of the ways that us Mohawks use tobacco and cedar and things like that are considered sacred knowledge. So that's not something I will just freely talk about. But if it's something, my challenge with those things is I want to learn more. I want to learn more about those things, and so I have to respectfully ask for in the company of elders, what can I learn about this, or what are you willing to teach me about this? And sometimes the answer has been, honestly, I'm not really willing to teach much about this for one reason or another. Maybe it's because I don't know you well enough. Maybe it's because you're not from this community or something like that. I just have to respect it. And I used to it used to kind of hit my ego because I have been trying so hard to be somebody in a world that didn't always accept me for who I was. I was never, like I said, neither. I'm not enough of one thing or the other. Therefore, am I nothing, or what am I? Like, what's important to me? I think that this sort of schism that I have is actually quite interesting, and I can draw a lot of inspiration from it for the art that I do, because I think that I have a unique story to tell. And I think that the story is similar for a lot of other people, and I think that maybe that story hasn't been given enough of a voice. Being a mixed person and sort of being between two worlds all the time, kind of wondering where you belong.
I loved how you said earlier that you were 200%.
I've always thought that, and I think it's awesome. I just think it's awesome who I am.
How does that engage with your artwork when you're expressing yourself artistically?
I think it lets me have more of an open mind, because the different types of, because I'm a collaborator. All of my art projects are designed to help to force me to reach technically, artistically, socially, because I'm actually quite introverted. But I've realized the more connection I have, the more I'm able to learn things from other people. It puts me on a personal journey, and it's not just me flexing. It's look what I can do. Look what I can do with my abilities. How cool is that? It's not really enough of a criteria for me to want to do that art project. I want it to be something where I get changed as a person through doing the research I have to do. So far, most of my knowledge seeking has been on a pan Indigenous scale, where I've tried to find Indigenous people from places well beyond Turtle Island, including Pacific Islanders, including Indonesian, Borneo, the Russian Far East, um, and I've also met like Sami people who live in like Norway, Finland, who they raise reindeer. They have beautiful dresses and costumes, and they have drums and stuff. And they have their own language, and they have their own thing. But yeah, they look white as hell. I'm not gonna lie to you. but when we're all together in a place like ImagineNative, there is this sort of pan Indigenous understanding that happens. That you come from there, I come from here, and we are celebrating our culture together. It's different than a powwow, because powwow is much more localized. It's much more like, this is our culture. Everybody here is of the same culture, basically, more or less. Sometimes you get mixed, Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee at a powwow, and that's about as diverse as it gets. But like, I've been to places where we had people from Africa, and they're Indigenous. Why wouldn't they be, right? Same thing. They're connected to their culture. They're connected to their history. They speak their language. They have their traditional ways of doing and being. And guess what? A lot of them are exactly the same as our traditional ways of doing and being. So the schism of trying to figure out if I'm Indigenous enough. Well, I've seen every stripe of Indigenous person in the past 2 years, and that that's changed my perspective, and that does inform my art, and it will continue to inform my art. But now I want to focus a little more inward, because I've had all that stuff. Now I've gone as far as New Zealand, um, and met all these amazing people. Now I want to meet some of the amazing people that are right under my nose. And hopefully my next art project or the next iteration of it is based on that. Because I think that there's going to be a really important, really interesting story to tell over the next 2 years for me. And yeah, I mean, again, it's something I don't really know. It's just a big question mark for me right now. But I'm going to put myself there, and I will face possible discrimination from people who, by the way, there are some Mohawk tribes that only believe that you can only be Mohawk if your mom was Mohawk. You are who your mother was. And if you're, in my case, my dad was Mohawk, my mom is Irish. And so by their standards, I'm not Mohawk at all. And to me, that just sounds unbelievable. There's other traditions in Mohawk traditions that say that the bear clan is the adoptive clan because your clan comes from your mother. You're either a bear, a turtle, a wolf, or a snipe. Those are the four in Mohawk. And if you don't have a Mohawk mother, then there's this thing called the adoptive clan, which is the bear clan. You become a member of the bear clan. So some Mohawks think, sure, you can be Mohawk if you don't have a Mohawk mother. It just means you're bear clan. And then there's other groups that say, no, you are who your mother is, and you're not Mohawk by our measure. And so navigating that kind of, whether it's protectionism, isolationism, or discrimination, is another story that I think needs to be told. Because I don't necessarily think all the reasons for it are malevolent, but there is a difference in how one community views it over another, and I really want to know all that. I want to know where the limits are.
I think so much of that is colonization, that there was so much destruction. There was so much shame attached. My thinking is, what about your dad's mom? Wouldn't you be considered part of that clan? Because I don't even know what the clans are in my community. I don't have that knowledge. It's mostly gone. So, like, what do we do? I asked one time about the clans and in my community, and somebody said, well, Bear Clan. And I'm like, everybody? That can't be good. You know? What, did they split them off into clans when they created the reserves? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have that knowledge, and the people I've spoken to or who are left, because so many are gone, they don't have that knowledge either. And I hear conflicting stories all the time.
The scars of intergenerational trauma are everywhere, and very much so in my family too. The reason my dad spoke Mohawk was not because he wanted to. It was because he was of the generation where his mom only spoke Mohawk, but she had gone to residential school, and he had also gone to day school, and he wanted education. He wanted to study. His mom wanted him to be a doctor. Okay, that's what he had to be. He tried. It didn't work out. He just didn't have the passion for it. But what he did have the passion for was to study philosophy, to study Latin, to study history. And his mom did not accept that. I only learned about these things after Dad passed away, the difficulties that he had growing up and the trauma that was there. He spoke Mohawk because people in his generation had to communicate with their parents. So he was the first one in his family that could speak English, or among the first people in his family that could speak English. And it did not occur to him that later on in life he would be helping keep the language alive, teaching Mohawk. He could not have predicted that. It was only something that happened when the need for it came, and he realized, this is actually something I love. And I do believe that this was a form of healing for him, to be able to share the language, the culture, the history, and to have people learn the language through him. I think was something that he was extremely proud of. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I mean, and I know he's not around. It would be a lot easier to learn from him if he still was. But I'm not going to let that be an impediment to my language journey. This is what I want for myself, and this is my way of healing. And this is very important to me. And it would not be that way if it wasn't for all of the experiences I've had in the past 2 years in doing art, doing Indigenous focused art, Indigenous focused like technological outreach and workshops and all these things, which I will continue to do. But I'm willing to do things that are not easy, that don't have a certain answer, because I just want that in my life. I just want I want that influence in my life because it's going to take me somewhere good. I just know it. And where that is yet, I'm not sure yet. But we've talked about some pretty fun ideas. Like we've talked about running a technology booth and doing the powwow circuit. Like, can you imagine that? Like an arcade where you could come in and play all these like indigenous games. People would not be expecting that, but people would love it. And so that is another project that we're currently trying to get funded.
Excellent. Um, would you mind telling me your dad's name?
Yeah, my dad's name is Digahuwazit Mel Diabo.
You must be very proud of him. And I'm sure he is immensely proud of you.
I think he's proud of me. If he knew the kind of people I was hanging out with when I was in New Zealand, I would met this guy named Tame Iti, and he was an activist in the 60s before it was cool to be an indigenous activist. He was out there and he created an indigenous, what do you call it, an indigenous embassy or an aboriginal embassy on the grounds of parliament, and he was incarcerated. He's been incarcerated multiple times for his activism, but you know what, he has changed the world. And he is so well respected in the community, in the Maori community. I was sitting on a bench just enjoying the sunshine with him. This little 8-year-old kid came up to me and was like, "Is that Tame Iti?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, it is." and I also met the Australian Aboriginal equivalent to his name is Richard Bell. He loves karaoke. Guy loves to party. He's hilarious. He's hilarious. If I was able to sit down and tell Dad, like, these people I spent time with, real time with, and they went and tried my art and they loved my art, like, this is something that my dad would have just loved to hear. So I know he's still around. I know he's still pulling some strings for me now and then and intervening now and then. I've had proof of that. And so, yeah, I think he would be very approving of what I'm trying to do. He'd be very proud of me, of what I've been able to accomplish in this short time that I've been doing this thing, and excited for where it's going.
Well, it sounds like you've got an incredible path ahead of you. I'm envious.
Well, we're all doing it in our own way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much there that, what you're doing will contribute so much to the language, to digital technology, to the engagement between Indigenous people and digital technology. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely, and also your contributions as well to like the rise of Indigenous media are so important, for these materials to be out there, and for me to help out with this is something I'm very very happy to do. I do believe that we are living in the middle of a huge renaissance in Indigenous art, Indigenous creativity, Indigenous storytelling. We are beginning to see some of the very best in Indigenous filmmaking, Indigenous game design and experience design, and Indigenous art writ large. And to be a part of that, for us, for you and I, to be along for that, there's nowhere else you would probably ever want to be than to be like doing this right now, taking part in it, sort of experiencing the joy of it. Because what it is Indigenous healing and Indigenous joy.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. I can't thank you enough. It's been really, for me, I'm feeling so much more hopeful. Sometimes you get into the daily grind and you just kind of put one foot in front of the other, especially in the granting system where you're just trying to get to the next grant. And then I get to have a conversation like this with you, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, there's a reason we're doing this. There's hope. We're actually trying to do something bigger than just type out something to get more money so that we can maybe move forward or maybe not. This is the case.
That's always the case. Yeah, I mean, it really pays to step back and remind yourself of the big picture. And I'll be totally honest, I needed this too. I really did, because I've been bogged down and dated to look at this. Like, this is a pile of boxes. This is the living room in my mom's house right now, which is currently uninhabitable. This is all my stuff. and I'm going to be spending the rest of the day putting it away, but with renewed energy because we had this wonderful conversation today.
Oh, glad. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monique. Goa Goa.
Yeah, Kachimi Gridge. Thank you.